Welcome to Living Your Greatness. Each episode, we bring on great people to inspire you to achieve your greatness. We discuss topics all related to health and wellness. Listen to world-class stories, learn valuable lessons, and turn knowledge into action. It is now time for you to unlock your inner greatness. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Living Your Greatness. This is your host, Ben Mummy, and today we have a new guest to the show, and her name is Lorelei Higgins. So for those of you that don't know Lorelei, she is a community lead for the anti-racism work with the City of Calgary and consultant on Indigenous relations matters. She also has experience working on a Cultural Mediator, Rotary Peace Fellow, and Positive Peace Activator. As a Métis Canadian, Lorelei comes by peacebuilding roots naturally. She has led conflict transformation projects globally with a focus on Indigenous human rights. Lorelei is also Miss Canada Globe 2021 and will be one of the longest serving Miss Canadas to date, with 18 months by the time she crowns the next one. So Lorelei, welcome to the show. It is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Oki, Danitara, Ambawastich, Tanshe. Hello, everybody. And thank you, Ben. What a wonderful, wonderful welcome. I feel like we've covered my whole life already.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for being very inclusive there with your kind of welcome at the start of this podcast. So I kind of want to hop in and share with our listeners, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you spend your formative years growing up in Canada? And what inspired you to become the strong leader and empowering woman you are today?
Well, thank you for those kind compliments. As a young girl, I don't know that I thought I'd ever be called those things. So thank you. So yes, I grew up in small town Alberta. My family on my dad's side is from the Red River in Winnipeg, and my mom's side is from Kamloops, and before that from Italy. And so, yeah, I just grew up in an acreage that was in the armpit between two towns. And I was really much a country girl, and I rode my bike to school and took the school bus for hours. The small town, which is not so small anymore, that I went to school in was Spruce Grove.
So thanks for sharing a little bit of background of kind of where you're from. I actually didn't realize that you were from a country background. I knew obviously where you were born and stuff like that, but I didn't know that it was on the countryside. So that was really cool to learn. So before we hop into today's chat, I think it's really important for my listeners to understand what exactly you do, because I know you've worn many different hats. Could you give us a little bit more of a background of those titles that I kind of shared earlier on?
Absolutely, Ben. It'll give me a chance to answer the second part of your question. Why I just realized I didn't. So you'd also asked me what inspired you to become the strong leader and power woman you are today. And I was so flattered I didn't answer. So the hats that I wear today is directly linked to that. So as a young kid, I had a lot of great role models, and I had people who just, teachers especially, who said, try it. Why don't you? And in particular, the different hats that I wear today is a reflection of a really pivotal point in my life when a teacher pulled me aside and said, "You're a great student. Would you ever think of becoming a Rotary exchange student?" And I said, "What does that mean?" And she said, "We'll send you off to another country for a full year." And she said, "You'll go back to high school and you'll do all kinds of things, but you'll work on service projects and live with different families." And so I ended up applying, and that changed my whole life and is directly linked to where I am today. So the many hats that I wear are a development and a growth, and they're always growing and changing, but a lot of work in the international development field. And originally I started my career out there. I was an intern with Foreign Affairs, and I went off to Bolivia. And then as I got a little bit older, I wanted to do a master's degree and kind of be in one place. And so I settled down in Calgary, which is where I live now. And I decided to become a mom. And so what that meant is I needed some more roots. And so I started working for local government, knowing that I would be a little bit more set in place when the kids were young. And now that they're a little bit older, I have a chance to return to my international career a little bit. And so that's where my consulting work gets to come in.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thanks for sharing the background of some of the different hats that you've worn. Something that I do admire about you, which I know you've kind of developed through all these different kind of career paths, is you are super passionate about being an everyday peace builder. So, from my understanding, a peace builder is someone who acts in small ways every day to make the world a more peaceful place. But what does a peace builder mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can honestly tell you, I didn't even know that it could be called a thing. Just when I was younger, I've always been a middle child. And so I think naturally it came to me as like, oh, what I think you're saying is this to my younger brother. And what I think you're saying this to my older sister. And I'd always find a ground. I'd always be that arbitrary point where I was mediating what they were violently fighting about. And so I learned that role quite early on. And then without digging too much into my cultural heritage until later on in life, I didn't realize that being Métis is actually, that middle ground of cultures coming together. So for those of you who aren't as familiar with the Métis people of Canada, typically we can be called the fur trade children. And sometimes there's been other words used that I won't repeat on the show today, but we all are often that, it's that new nation. So what happened when European nations came over to Canada and met with Indigenous peoples? Well, a brand new nation was born. And so we are that mediation point where we can usually speak some European languages and Indigenous languages and walk in both worlds. And so for me, when I think about peace building, that's really what it encompasses, is finding that space where you can let people be seen and heard and be who they are and really engage in a meaningful way together, but create a constructive society where we all have an equal role and place.
That's beautiful. It was cool to kind of hear about, like, a little bit of your upbringing there, of how you always felt like it came natural, like through your siblings and being that, I guess, peacekeeper, between your siblings. And then cool how that kind of developed over time. But something that I'm curious about leading from this is, there are many ways to be a change maker and a peace builder. And so I know you have a lot of experience. You've even have, I believe, like a degree as well, right? Where you kind of studied more. You also connected with other peace builders. So for the benefit of my listeners, what are some ways that they can build peace in their community?
Yeah. And you know what? I think peace is a thing of the 60s. Is it something we're never going to achieve? And so it's been really amazing to watch the redefinition of peace. So something that I find super helpful is to look at the Institute for Economics and Peace, and they make a really cool economic case for peace. So they look at the cost of violence, and then they look at the typical definitions of what peace is. And it's usually like the absence of violence or the absence of fear of violence. And so if that's all we stick with peace, we don't really get to like, what are the positive things that actually start to create peace? And so when I look at, that everyday peace building and what it actually means, it's the things you do every single day. Because if you start to think about like, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to solve this armed conflict, it starts to become overwhelming. So if you can think at the most granular level, what can you do at a school? What can you do in a community garden? What can you do in a grocery store to help out? And what can you do? And I know it's a question you'll probably ask me about, but what can you do to connect? So instead of being that person that walks through your community and not feeling that fabric, and we all know when we get to a place and it's connected. And there's a reason why places like in Europe and Latin America have plazas. It's the heart, it's the connection point. And that's why we value so much community centers and places where we can come together, because we get to visually see us together. And I think COVID's been a little bit hard for that. But it's also offered increased opportunities. So for those of you who are looking for like, what can I actually do? Like, Lorelei, give me something concrete. Volunteer. So where in your community is there a need? Where can you just show up? And I always say peace building is just show up. Someone will give you a job. Be the person who makes the sandwiches. Be the person who offers to get the extra supplies. Be that person, and it doesn't have to be anything extraordinary, but that person who just shows up in community. And there's probably a lot of stories I could tell you around that. But what I'll briefly share is one day I really felt like a heroic peace builder. I found a little boy running down the street, and I just, as a human being, thought he's quite young to be alone. So I went to him and I stayed with him. And, eventually his mother came running, and he was 6 blocks from home. He escaped through the front door. And to me, that is the essence of peace building in your community. Where can you show up and be there as a good, strong community member and be there for your neighbors?
Awesome. That's great. I think you brought up some really good points. I really like the fact that you brought in volunteerism as well as how you've kept it simple of saying like just show up, like just being there. And it actually made me think of, I think throughout my life, a core value has always been community. Whether that's right now doing a podcast where it's online community, or whether that was, as a leader through sport, through community. But it made me really think of I don't know if you've heard of it, but November Project, where their slogan is "Just show up."
Yeah.
Anyways, I found it really interesting how a lot of those qualities and kind of action steps, like they're very simple that anyone could apply to any community that they're in. So thanks for sharing that. And I heard you speak at a conference. It was at the Motivate conference this past year. Something that you were big about was peace conversations.
Mhm.
So I know you said it was a way like increasing connectors and decreasing dividers. So what did you mean by that?
Yeah. So I can't take credit for that. Irene Santiago, who's like one of the most amazing female peace builders in the world. She's the peace advisor to the mayor in Davao City in the Philippines. She taught me that. And she said, we get so complicated in what we think peace building is, but like, what if you just increased a connector and decreased a divider? And the way we were taught and the way that I kind of walk in the world today is something through simple conversation. So when we're having these hard conversations, it's really easy to disagree, right? Like, I don't think that. Well, that's what you think, and we're never going to think the same, right? And the polarization today is it's really high. It's really one of those like, can we meet in the middle? Where is that middle ground where we can just maybe hear each other and learn something new and we don't have to agree? So when we look at a structured peace facilitated conversation, it really gets into our kind of track two diplomacy efforts. So as we look into mediation, how do we have a structured conversation? And there's different roles that people can take on. But what I can tell you is you don't have to get a certificate or a degree unless you really want to be able to perform that every day in your family, in your community, and even internationally. Because what we can decide to do in difficult conversations is really decide to play that mediation point where we help people hear each other. And so some questions that I get asked that are actually quite funny, they're very shocking. Like I get asked things, all kinds of things, everything from should I do a territorial acknowledgement to are you actually Indigenous? My own uncle asked me when we found out about the first of our 215 children being found in Kamloops. He said to me, well, how much is this going to cost us now? So you can see where those turning points happen in conversation. And quite often it's with our own family, but we can choose to say, what does that mean to you? Yeah, okay, let's unpack that. And then is that an opportunity for me to learn and you to learn and then for us to grow? And so when I think about everyday peace building, yeah, it can be just as simple as the conversations we choose to have and the space we hold for them.
That's very powerful because it makes me think of, every conversation, right? It ends up creating awareness, right? And by having like the listening skills to hear out each other and hear out each other's perspectives can then help give like the respect and the healthiness that you want, through topics like peace. So
Yeah.
I do think that is a huge kind of idea that you've kind of advocated for is increasing that connection or connectors and decreasing those dividers, right? Of kind of having everyone kind of separated or thinking that, there's a one size fits all, understanding that no, we could have a diverse opinions and that's okay, but knowing how to be able to hear each other out. So I think that's very powerful. And thank you for kind of unpacking that.
And I should mention, Ben, Mediators Beyond Borders is a big part of my life, and they do a lot of the training around that. So I would have to give some credit to them too and give a shout out because they're an awesome organization that has taught me a lot as well around that field.
If someone wanted to learn more about that, where's the best spot for them to go?
Yeah, if you're online, hopefully you are. If you're watching this, you must be. Yeah, their website, Mediators Beyond Borders, they have great intern opportunities, consulting opportunities, and all kinds of ways you can just become part of the network. And then Rotary International has so much great work around peace building. And then there's all the formal trainings around the world. There's stuff here in Canada that's just incredible once you start looking. So yeah, I encourage each of you to find a place that feels good to you and then work with those organizations. And the neat thing is once you're in the field, yeah, a lot of the organizations work together. You find each other and the skills. For me, the biggest thing too is how do I apply Indigenous ways of knowing into these processes? So just journeying through that of like what's documented in my own community, other communities, and then how do I find organizations willing to push and stretch that? And so, yeah, just joining a new initiative really around that is how do we use Indigenous ways of knowing embedded into typical like peace facilitated conversations. So I'll have more on that once I dig in.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I'll make sure to include that in kind of like the podcast notes. But another thing I want to touch on, I kind of said this at the start that you have strong leadership skills. And I know you have participated in prestigious national leadership programs. You've already mentioned a couple and have also worked with many great leaders. But what qualities do you believe separates, a good leader from a great leader?
I'm so glad you asked that. I just was part of something last week that made me realize there's such a distinction. And this is it. The leader who asks, the leader who comes in and isn't the expert and says like, how can I help? What did you mean by this? Can you explain? Can you teach me? And what a difference when a person comes with that versus a person who storms in with all the answers and says, because I said so. And having recently experienced that big range in leadership, we all have different leaders in our life and different things happen. But it was really, really clear to me in the last couple of weeks of what a difference when a person comes in with leadership skills that are just so attuned to knowing that they don't have all the answers. And what makes them a great leader is because they're surrounded by great people.
That's beautiful. It's funny that you mentioned great leader asks, good questions or is curious. I kind of got that vibe, like they're curious or they're also humble, right? Because you said, they don't actually know everything or they're not pretending that they know everything. And I think something else to add to that too, I actually wrote like an infographic today and it was on, between a good and a great leader. And I had a lot of examples of very, very great leaders who actually failed a lot. Like Michael Jordan was told, in high school that he wasn't going to make it to his high school basketball team and he didn't. And next thing you know, later on in life, he obviously became a really world-class basketball player. Another aspect, I think, is also having that ability to not be afraid to fail and to learn as well, too. So those are some other things that I would like to also add to some of the things that you said.
Yeah.
Something that I want to move to is I know we talked a lot about your professional life, but then there's also some really cool things, I think, from your personal life. And one of the things we already kind of briefly kind of mentioned on is that you're a mother. But also in like the last year, you won Miss Canada Globe 2021 and I believe 2020 as well, which is a pageant for Miss and Mrs. Women who are married, separated, divorced, widowed. And it also raises money for a charity addressing women's empowerment, which I found really interesting. But can you tell us what it meant for you to win and how did it feel?
It was surreal. Like, a good leader tries things and might fail. I feel like it was a really experimental space, but I have to preface that with 20 years prior, I was in a drama class and I had competed because there was all these options for scholarships and they said you could do a calendar, you could do this pageant. And I was like, what does the pageant pay? Okay, great. I really need money for school. So I flew to Toronto and I placed in the top 10. And that was all that was required to get the money for school. And so I had this small, tiny experience of a one-time pageant in Canada, and it was a great experience. And it truly was a scholarship program. Now, this particular pageant, when it came up, it was interesting to me, like you said, because of what the pageant stood for. In this particular case, all the funding goes to women who have been in domestic violence situations. So there's a really amazing history with the founder and what she went through and what she decided to do later on in life to help other women who have been through terrible times. And so as, I learned more about that, I thought it was interesting. But a really interesting thing that emerged for me was through the Institute for Economics and Peace, really starting to think like, if I went to the pageant and I talked about world peace for real, like if I talked about the 8 pillars of positive peace, what would that look like? And so there was a synergy that started to happen of like, okay, this could be fun. And so mid-COVID, I had about 6 weeks to prepare, and then I had to fly to Vegas and go into a COVID bubble. And it was all so exciting. And so what it meant to me, though, is my community quickly rallied behind me. So I had a bunch of elders that essentially said, this is what it would take for you to be able to compete and for us to support you. And so that was really important that the elders did that. And they said, we'd like you to use your language. We'd like you to wear your Métis sash on all things possible. And at the same time, we'd like you to talk about current events. What's happening in Canada? What affects you as an Indigenous person? So those were all really good things. So as I went in, I could feel the backing of my whole community. And I was like, I'm just going to do my best. And so to actually win brought up a lot of where I come from, and the people who love and support me were right up there with me. And so I feel like it's their win as well. And that's only grown being actually Mrs. Canada now, because I never had Instagram before. I wasn't on social media at all. And so the community of people that I've been able to connect with and just grow has multiplied and multiplied. And so I feel really privileged that as an Indigenous Canadian woman, I have these amazing conversations.
Yeah, no, I think that's super beautiful. I think it's really cool that this was more than just a win for you. It was a win for your community, like the whole Métis community and having their support and having their belief in you, in terms of like the elderly. So that kind of says something about you, that you're obviously community driven, and that this kind of experience, after kind of winning, how you've also taken that opportunity to kind of share that back with them, which I think is really cool. What does the win mean for you as a Métis woman from Canada?
It means for one of the first times ever in pageant history, and I keep asking, but I don't see a lot of Métis sashes on the stage. I know a lot of people have identified as being Indigenous, but have they identified as being Métis? Have they worn their sash? Have they insisted that it be on the cover? So there's this visual representation. And I can honestly say, without scanning too in depth, I haven't seen me up there. I've seen other Indigenous women from who might be First Nations or Inuit, but I haven't seen a Métis woman. So I feel a little bit like if there's any little girls out there who decide they want to do this and they are Métis or Indigenous in general, then I feel like that's amazing if I can inspire them. I also feel like it's really important for me. I have so many stories of never being tall enough for point guard for basketball, never quite being good enough for this or that. So to just really decide this was something I wanted to do and put my whole heart and soul into it and really put myself out there in the community and get support. I feel like winning Mrs. Canada is proving to myself that anything is possible. And I quite often ask the question, why not me? So, we go through life thinking, oh, that person's good at that person. But then you think, why not me? And so that's me putting into action that true leadership of like, if I don't try it, and if I don't even fail or get it or whatever, then I don't have skin in the game. So I need to always continually challenge myself as well to make sure that I'm living my greatness.
I think you brought up a lot of great points there. I like first the one that you said how you had never seen, a Métis actually really celebrate or kind of show off like their true colors and where they're from and their heritage and all that stuff. And now that, this win has created a role model, right? An example for children or youth from where you're from, that they could do it too. And so I think that's cool because, every person needs a role model to then believe that it's possible. But then I like the second part too, where you talk about how the hard work paid off, trying it out, putting yourself out there again, giving it your best shot, kind of seeing if you could actually live your greatness in this area, So I found that was cool. And at the same time, I think something that was key from that is lots of times people put other people on a pedestal, like Michael Phelps, he must just be talented. Yes, he obviously has physical advantages but he also trained very hard. He was also very resilient, based on his upbringing. But the point that I'm trying to get at is I believe that a lot of these people who have either achieved that level or, done well or won a competition or did academically well in school, it comes from belief and it comes from hard work that then turns into success. Congratulations. I think that's, a big win to celebrate. So that's awesome. I understand that you are married and you are a mother of 2 kids. So what advice would you give, aspiring young mothers to have a work, family, and life balance?
That's a great question. So I have a hashtag that I use sometimes. It's hashtag mom, not martyr. And so I decided early on that we had to be a unit. So we had to make decisions that fit our family. And quite often, I think the model that we're in, we make adjustments for male counterparts or somebody in the relationship who might be playing that role. And I think sometimes there's this thing that happens where, we might have the double burden where we try to do it all and then we're burnt out and then we just give up on things. And I started a bit of an experiment. I was like, well, what happens if I do this? What happens if I do a peace fellowship in Thailand and the kids come for part of it? And I would love to tell you it's easy, but it's not. There is some mom shaming that happens out there, like, well, where are your kids and how can you do this? My answer quite often is, well, as a female, I also work, and just like a man, I can go to work and then I can. So I do have to combat that, but overwhelmingly, having a supportive community who can pitch in is great. And so it's also recognizing that you can't do everything alone. You need all those roles in your life, much like the medicine wheel, like we need grandfather and grandmother figures, and we need cousins and we need aunts. And so in many Indigenous communities, you get adopted into places because we need to make sure we have those people in our life because it takes a whole community to raise a family. And so quite often you will see many people at our house and us at over other people's houses just sharing things, rides, food, just really helping each other out and maintaining that balance. Because yeah, in order to be our best, I think the biggest recognition is to realize you don't need to do it alone.
I think you brought up some great points, but the one that I want to kind of focus on there is having that supportive team or community, whether that's family, whether that's a friend, grandfather, uncles, maybe even neighbors, right? But having people that lift each other up, right? That's a huge, huge aspect, right? So for you to be able to thrive as a mother, but also in your professional life, you need that support to make sure that when you're not there, that everything's all good, everything's okay, right? So having that community, having that support. So something that I want to move to next is, as you know, the purpose of this podcast is to inspire millions of people to achieve greatness and enhance their overall personal well-being. So what is your definition of greatness?
Greatness is that feeling. And I know there's so many different ways to describe it, but it's like it's effortless. So you're like in your flow and you're in what you're meant to be doing. And we all hit that in different ways. Like I know there's some sports analogies and there's other ways to describe it. But when you just feel that like I'm doing my life's work, this is my soul's purpose, that's your greatness. And it calls to you. And, and you think, I'll do that when I do this, or I'll do it. But when you're in that zone and you're doing what you came to this earth to do, you know it. And it's not always easy. It can be a flow or a zone, but there's something so innate about it that it feels like it's like water in the desert. You're just in it and it's filling you and it flows from you. And like I think most people, when I see them living their greatness, they glow and they just are doing what they're meant to do. So yeah, in really simple terms, I would just encourage everybody, if you have gifts or you're excited about something, it's likely your greatness talking to you. So find the time to explore it, find avenues to dip into it, and don't be afraid of it. And you might not be good at your greatness, but if it lights you up and it brings that joy to the world and it feels reciprocal, you're likely in your greatness.
Absolutely. I think you said it very well. And it made me think of, like your definition of greatness, of finding your passion, right? And kind of like you said, even if you're not great at the beginning at it, if you enjoy it so much, if it lights you up, if it fires you up, if it's maybe even a natural high, time over time, if you're really into that and you're practicing it, there's an expression that I call it's fire catches fire, right? So if you're really, really, pumped up, passionate about something that you're trying to either get good at or something that you just enjoy really doing and get into that flow state, kind of like you said, that over time, if you believe that you could really, get there at some point. And I think something to add to that is, everyone's level of greatness could be different too. It doesn't need to be always, a world-class level as well, right? It doesn't need to be to that extent. It needs to be to unlocking your true potential, and I think everyone has a different level of that. Right. So I think your overall theme there was, catching that passion, that fire, because fire catches fire.
I love that. I'm going to remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. So who is a future guest that you would like to see on the show?
Ooh, that is an excellent question. I've had this mentor for a really long time. He's this Mohawk man named Dr. Mike Lickers. I want him on the show. He is the best storyteller that I've ever heard. He's taught me some of my hardest lessons. He's watched me grow up. He's helped me just continue to learn who I am. He pushes me. His son is friends with my kids, and like we camp together and we write together. And so I think the viewers would definitely love seeing him. And I think it would be great for him to share more of his gifts with the world.
That's awesome. Well, I would love to have him on the show, to have a conversation, that's meaningful and impactful for others to hear. And especially if, he had such an impact on your life, I would love to share that, with others. And so thanks for that. I take you up on that challenge. So, if you're able
Let's give him a call, Ben. Let's give him a call.
Let's do it.
Dr. Mike Lickers, we're coming for you.
Let's do it. Yeah, it's coming. All right. Awesome. Yeah. So I can't wait to have him on one day. And my last question to end off today's podcast episode would be, where could our listeners go to connect with you online, learn more about what you're doing, all the cool things, or maybe not cool things. No, I'm just kidding. But where,
not always, yeah.
Where can people go to connect with you online?
Yeah, so I'm online now. So yes, you can find me. The internet's a crazy place. So you can put Lorelei Higgins into Google and you find all kinds of stuff. I'm always looking for feedback. So please, if you're terrible at reels, like you should do this, please let me know. I'm much like you, Ben. I'm always out there trying it. And it's like, what does this do? Let's try. I am on Instagram at Mrs. Canada Globe 2021. I'll keep that handle for a while, come what may in June when I crown the new Mrs. Canada. I'll still be under that personality. I'll always be your Mrs. Canada 2021. That's never going to change. And I'm also on Facebook. I have a public profile under Lorelei Mrs. Canada Globe 2021. And other than that, there's a few articles and I'm about to publish a few chapters and books. So you'll start to see some of my stuff in writing soon. So that'll be exciting. It'll be online.
Awesome. Great. Cool. So I will be sure to add that as well in like the podcast notes. I'm sure people will be excited, to follow your journey as well as to also see where like this upcoming book comes, because that's pretty exciting. And I want to take like the last little bit of time to thank you for being here today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for sharing your gift with all the listeners listening in today. And I'm really excited as well, to continue this friendship and relationship and follow your work and kind of also be your support system as well. But yeah, anyways, I just want to end off with, again, thanks for being here today.
Oh, Ben, I am so amazed. And at the conference that I met you at in particular, I was so filled with energy and just reminded, our youth, you're our leaders. We need you. We need you to keep speaking up and trailblazing and pushing us. I'm probably a lot older than you. And so I feel, there's such wisdom in what you have to share and the technology you're able to use and the lenses by which you see the world. And so it's such a gift that you're walking in your way as well. And at that conference where we met, to be surrounded by so many youth doing such incredible work, it's just that reminder of the generations that are needed. We need our elders and our knowledge keepers, and we need us who are somewhere in the middle, but we really need our youth to keep pushing us and showing us better ways of doing things. So I honestly have to say thank you. And like, you can look at my Instagram and probably help me out a lot. I'm just like a person pushing buttons on there.
That's awesome. And I appreciate those kind words, because I do agree with you, where I think everyone, whether you're young or whether you're old, I think everyone plays a role in society. And this might be, a little cheesy, but, the whole circle of life, right? I think there's a lot of passing of like the torch. And yeah, I do agree that a lot of youth, have a lot of energy, and they also do have wisdom too. They still have a lot to learn, so that's why I'm bringing on people like you, who I think, have incredible stuff to share, whether it's, wisdom, whether it's life lessons, or whether it's even just knowledge as well. So yeah, thanks again for being here today.
What a lovely, lovely time together. And to all the listeners, thanks for being with us. I'm so excited to see who Ben continues to bring on. And I hope those of you listening get a chance to be on here as well, so we can learn more about you.
Thank you for listening to the Living Your Greatness podcast. If this show has added value, please subscribe, leave a rating, and make a review.